Hello, welcome to join us. I would like to remind you that there is some water, coffee, and tea for you, and some breads and sandwiches. We recommend you to take a seat in the middle area so that you can have a better view of the slides. Uh, thank you. Before we start, just a soft reminder that please turn your cell phone on the silence or vibrate mode. Thank you. Hi everyone, welcome again to join us. Just a soft reminder, please turn your cell phone on vibrate or silent mode. And there is water, coffee, and tea for you over there. And you can also grab some bread and sandwiches. Thank you. We will start in 5 minutes.
好吧，行，这样可以了，是吧？
Good morning, good evening, colleagues and the students and our distinguished guests. Welcome to Professors of XJTLU Public Lecture Series. 欢迎各位莅临在西浦听讲座。I'm Professor Bei Tang from the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. It's my great pleasure to be the academic chair of this lecture series. For those who are not familiar with this lecture series, please allow me to briefly introduce Professors of XJTLU. This public lecture is our university's signature event for scholarly communication and knowledge dissemination. At XJTLU, we have now around 45 professors through whom we would like to promote our unique research culture. This public lecture series will be delivered by XJTLU professors from different research fields, introducing their career-long research or a comprehensive review of the selected research topics, as well as the cutting-edge developments in the field. The lecture series will be offered throughout the academic year to both XJTLU staff, students, as well as the public audience. Through stimulating presentations using plain language, the professors of XJTLU Public Lecture Series will explain complex research topics and bring showcase of our university's research impact and its contribution to our community and society. Today, we have our second speaker of this lecture series, Professor You Ji, who is from the Department of International Studies at the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. Professor You Ji is an international relations scholar. He studied at Beijing University as an undergraduate student. He then did his honors degree at Victoria University of Wellington. He obtained his master's and PhD degrees at Australian National University. Professor You Ji worked in New Zealand, Australia, and Singapore. Between 2015 to 2022, Professor You was the head of the Department of Government and Public Administration at Macau University. In September 2022, Professor You Ji joined the Department of International Studies at XJTLU. Professor You is the author of 4 books published by leading press, including Routledge and the Polity Press. He has also published numerous book chapters and journal articles in the field of international relations as well as China studies. He sits on the editorial board of quite a few leading academic journals, including the China Journals, Issues and Studies, and the Journal of Contemporary China. Today, Professor You will lecture on the topic on Sino-US relations, and Professor You will talk about 50 to 60 minutes, and then we will open the floor for questions. So without further ado, I give you Professor You Ji.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor and Dean Tang. It's my great honor to be invited to give this talk, and I'm really humbled by the audience and my old friend, Professor David Goodman. Actually, I regard it as my motto from the very beginning of my academic career, from the master's studies onwards. A few words about the title. Normally, when we put the challenges there, we also add the word opportunities. So challenges are embedded in opportunities that indicate something you are looking for in a positive note, but are deliberate omit opportunities. In this title, I think this is a quite depressing title, but in tone with the strategic depiction of Xi Jinping on the current international geopolitical situation. But his word, of course, the profound change in the world order unseen in the century was quite neutral, but compared with the strategic depiction of his predecessor, such as Hu Jintao, that China was in a period of strategic opportunities, 战略机遇区. So this was already quite down, kind of trend in China's interaction with the international order. Okay, Xi Jinping's depiction comes from his, I think, practitioner or leader's perspective. I think he, as President Biden, when he meets his top advisors on foreign affairs in Zhongnanhai, I think he is mostly reported with some challenging events and problems that China encountered in interaction with the other countries, especially with the United States. So this is a practitioner's depiction, but it has significant theoretical relevance as it touches upon the core issues of international relations theory, power and power transition, war and peace, common destination of the human being vis-a-vis the hegemonic approach that some dominant powers exercise in so-called global leadership. Now, the two major, the power transition is very rich in contents, but I had only 2 attributes to mention to you today. Power transition is really about the rise of China as far as the Chinese, understand the world. And of course, to me, power transition is mainly due to the worsening of Sino-US relations. That is the biggest challenge for China to handle in the next, now and in the next several decades. So here, profound change in Sino-US relations, it really concretely means that the US has terminated the engagement policy towards China, and in its replacement, it is kind of a containment policy that would usher in a long period of containment against China in the years ahead. So defining power transition, power transition is really about power. Power is a core defining feature of international relations theory and the foundation of state relationship. Power shift describes a process in which major powers achieve differentiated growth in economic development and differentiated rate in the investment in military power capability enhancement. And so the different rate of development ushers in or causes the uneven development between different powers and generate this kind of power transition. And the hierarchy, the word of hierarchy, world system is hierarchical, and the states have an invisible place in it. I'll show you this picture. Now this is kind of hierarchy. Sorry, the sources are not showing here. But when we see this hierarchical order, we have the dominant power, great powers, middle powers, and the small powers. So power transition is actually the game of crossing different layers. Now, if we see Russia, USSR used to be at the top, but now it has been a great power, so to speak, but probably after the Ukraine war, it may drop to the next level. But when we see China's place in this hierarchical order, it used to be in the second tier, great powers, but most of people would define China to have crossed the line of the second tier towards the first tier, although it hasn't reached up in parity with the United States. When China is doing this kind of, when the power transition is kind of a game of, we call the changing positions in this international order, it generates inevitable conflicts among them. For example, if China goes up to the top tier, I think Americans would say, please go back. It is very crowded here. So generally, we human beings are very territorial, and we jealously guard the position we have already had and guard against other people's or countries' intrusion. So we are really like the lion, tiger, and the wolf. And that's what I'm trying to say here is that the power transition is very dynamic. It is actually moving towards inevitable conflicts between the top powers. And the dynamics really mean uncertainties in these inevitable conflicts of major power transformation and the transition. Generally speaking, while the top powers are competing for influence and for leadership, the conflict is inevitable because, as I said, leadership is a kind of fixed asset. It's a kind of zero-sum game. One country gains additional share, it normally means the loss of the original piece of cake in the process. Therefore, the rivalry for leadership is always zero-sum. Now, I would like to introduce my understanding of power transition in terms of the term of cycles. Cycles really mean gradual and incremental changes that take place in decades, if not in years. Now here, power transition is really about rise and fall of major powers, which does not happen overnight, but in long durations. Now these we call cycles. At the international level, world history is a kind of record of continuous rise and fall of major powers, although before the age of industrialization, the rise and fall of major powers took place in the regional setting. After that, we see the rise and fall of major powers, spread to the global setting and become, globalized in the process. So nationally, we also see rise and fall of national powers. Now, I use this example of China's rise. Now, we call it now the fourth cycle of rise. I will come back to this a little bit later. And finally, the cycles of accommodation and confrontation between hegemon and the rising powers. That is to say, at the beginning of the cycle, the power transition is relatively peaceful, and towards middle and towards end of it, it becomes more and more intensified in conflict. I remember we had a conference on Sino-US relations in 1996, and at the time, I think Gerald Segal, I think your friend, right, or enemy, it is not a kind of disrespectful for a person has passed away, but he said something that shocked me at the time, that was in 1996, that the biggest challenge for the Western world is China's rise. So before China really rises to the level that could pose tremendous challenge to us, we'll nail it down. Then when people ask how, and he said, if it means destruction of Hong Kong, be it. If it means destruction of Taiwan, be it. So specifically, the destruction of Hong Kong means that to introduce sweeping democratic reforms before the handover, so the foundation for the practice and the policy of one country, two systems could not be implemented in such an environment. And the destruction of Taiwan means encourage Taiwan to declare de jure independence. When that happens, China will take action, mainland will take action, and the policy proposal by Gerald Segal was very, very clever, that what was most effective to torpedo a country's rise? Of course, war, right? But in both cases, the two regions of China will be destroyed. But for the whole of the West, it meant a very cost-effective solution to deal with the rise of China. Now, I would like to say this about the cycle of the interaction between the dominant power and the rising power, in the sense that Gerald Segal's policy proposal, as a policy proposal, has not been taken as a policy option for the 30 years. So at the very beginning, when China started to rise, China was actually regarded as an opportunity with market access, business opportunities. But suddenly, I don't know who, suddenly some of, I think the Americans start awaken, before it's too late, we have to do something. But we see these kind of cycles of rise and fall of major powers, see the accommodation and the confrontation. Now these cycles are the key issues when we talk about the power transition as an AR concept. And we see the cycle, the China fourth cycle of rise, that was Professor Wang Gengwu's depiction and description. And it is also at the highest level of wealth in China's entire history. This compares sharply with similar characterization by Li Hongzhang in 1874. He said something like the international situation was in a profound change that has been unseen in 1,000 years, but Xi Jinping reduced it to 100 years. But whatever it is, it actually enlightened us many things. One of the things was that in this cycle, rise and fall, now China is on the rise at the moment, but the fall of the Qing dynasty, was due to the fact that the current rise of China was a result of China's opening up to the world, China's participation in globalization. But the reason for the fall, last cycle of China's fall, that was also due to the closed doorism by the Qing dynasty. Now, this generates a space for us to think about the rise and the fall of China academically, because it has a lot of value inside the whole issue. Now, I would like to mention a few of them, not exclusively. Now, the first one, as I already mentioned, the opening up and the closing down. And the second point was that China's rise has to be peaceful, especially in this international environment of unipolarity. So there is no other way for China to rise. Now, to prove this point, we haven't seen any war that China has involved in itself, I think, since 1979. So what I'm seeing, the war that is at the campaign level, although China and Vietnam had some border clashes at the battle level, that again ended in 1988. So since 1988, China has never involved itself in any military conflict in the world. So that is another very important factor for China to rise. Then the next point is that China is rising so fast. So China become rich in just one generation. This is very unique in the sense that people like me in my age, we were born and live in very hardship, extremely hardship, you can say it. But when you look at each time I work on the campus, I see the kids of the middle class and upper middle class. Look at the bags you carry and the cars you drive and the food you eat. This is a very sharp contrast, but it happened just within this one generation that I have already make it very clear, apparent to everyone else. And the final point on this one is that China has been the first non-Western country that has risen to this level of power since the age of Industrial Revolution. Japan rose to certain levels before the end of Second World War, and economically until China replaced it as second largest economy in 2001, but it has never risen to the level of top power comprehensively. These things give us a lot of food, the nutrition to think about academically, And also we see the kind of cycle, not when I talk about the domestic rise of domestic cycle, and the rise as pursued internationally. Now we see the factors. Now how far will China go? The answer to it has to be, arranged from the domestic sources and the international sources. But the answer is that China cannot really, there are some things that China can control. There are some things China cannot really control. Let me say what the factors that let the Chinese, be able to control. That's basically domestic stability. Now, when we see the fourth cycle of rise, now we have to ask this question: why the previous cycles, China ended in the fall? To answer this question, we also think another terminology we call the dynasty cycle. Probably people heard this. I think the talk between Mao Zedong and Zhou Peiyuan, Huang Peiyan in Xi'an in the 1930s. Now we had 25 dynasties. Now, this, I wouldn't call it dynasty, but at least, this cycle, dynasty cycle, continue to cycle on. So this morning we heard David talk the wealth inequality, right? Now that is a major challenge to continue the rise of China and of course corruption. Now when we think about these factors, we have to address these challenges before we can, how we can continue to rise in a healthy way. When we have a Gini index of only 4.6, and many people are fed up with this polarization of wealth distribution under this kind of political culture of egalitarianism. Now, this poses to me no less a challenge to China's rise than the international backlashes against the rise of China. But for the international causes and factors, now that China cannot really control. For example, American reaction to China's rise. In what way? Engagement, containment. Of course, America has opted for the second option of containment that will significantly impact on China's continue to rise. But anyway, data tells all about this steep rise, fast rise. In 1949, China's GDP total was about 1.7% of the world total. In 1978, it was 3.6%. Last year, it was about 19%. So you can see this very steady and fast accelerated rise. And other data can tell many things, such as China is the largest trading partner of 120 countries in the world. An interesting one for me is the factor, it's something that's related to Suzhou. Last year, Suzhou's GDP total exceeded the GDP total of Hong Kong. But back to 1997, Hong Kong's GDP total is larger than that of Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou combined. Now, this kind of very striking facts now give you this sense of what China rise is really about as far as economic data is concerned. Now, on this particular slide of the military spending, as I mentioned earlier, power transition takes place in two major areas: economic development, uneven, and the military spending. Now we can see this is from the CPRI. The sources should be there, but I don't know why it didn't appear. We can see another indicator of China's rise in military terms in the sense that if we talk about the global military spending structure, now just a few years ago, the picture was like this. America is on top, and the second group of major powers, China included, but today, America is on top, China is on the second place, and then we have a group of countries that could be called the third tier. But eventually, as the CPRI predicted that Chinese military spending would exceed that of the United States, I really have thought of that, but it was based on their study, based on some concrete calculation. I don't want to argue about that. Under this kind of circumstances, should China be accommodated as far as the Americans are concerned? Now we see if the answer is yes, it would create a new world order of concert of powers. We have several rounds of concerts of powers arrangement, which was created for avoiding wars between major powers. The latest one, that is between the two world wars, the major powers compromise and set up institutions and mechanisms of avoiding fighting with each other for the purpose of maximizing the gains from colonializing the whole world, and at the same time have a kind of acceptable distribution of the benefits. But now people started to think whether this kind of a concert of powers can be a practical method for the China's right to be accommodated. That was the question asked by my friend Hugh White, I think. Because according to Hugh White, if you don't want to accommodate China, what else that would be the option? Is that war? Of course, should not be thought as an option. But anyway, we see the answer that is no. That is no, because if you accommodate China based on this concept of a concert of powers, which to our Chinese, it was really a world order of multipolarity. So that would give China an equal power status to other Western powers. Certainly, politically, it wasn't correct in designing, in arranging such a power we call sharing. Somehow you don't share your power, your fortune with your enemy. The depiction of the United States in its 2017 National Defense Report and National Security Report categorically depicted China as the strategic rival. In open document, in classic document, depicted China as arch enemy. So if we think this way, whatever Americans do about China, it was logical, because you are doing something against your enemy. So you try your best to undermine your enemy. That was actually a rational choice. So, but Americans indeed try to accommodate China very, very briefly. I think under Obama, I think in the first years of Obama administration, Steinberg, the Deputy Secretary of State, he proposed a framework to accommodate China in words such as the responsible stakeholder. I think many of you remember this word. Now, what is about this, the significance of this word? That is, America and China should cooperate now to maintain the peace and stability in Asia-Pacific region. The concrete contents would be like this. China, US and its allies are the foundation for peace in the region. And China and the United States cooperate to prevent crises and provocations, especially the North Korea at the time, to sabotage the stability of the region. So in this way, China and the United States could be cooperative in maintaining the world order jointly. So that was a very, very brief period of time. Just 1 year, I think, after that, now Hillary Clinton proposed to have the so-called U.S. pivot to Asia, that completely reverse this kind of design for China and the United States to cooperate in international affairs. So when opportunities are gone, they are gone forever. And so to the United States, the option of containment seemed to be a rational one to undo China's rise. As I mentioned earlier, the worst of it is actually the war. So that is why I'm giving you a relatively depressing talk today, because power transition is basically about the military conflict, the war, the vicious cycle of power competition. So power shift continues until the world order is reset. And how to reset the world order? Very often the result in the battlefield. And the Thucydides trap, it's also about how the war was started between the rising powers and the dominant powers. Most importantly, the military balance is upset. Now, I never believed there is a military balance between China and the United States. Now, China is always in a weak and inferior position in this kind of balance of power with the United States. But to the United States, what is balance of power? It is about the US enjoying overwhelming superiority against China. That is a balance of power. But now what we see, China's rising, especially in military power, has narrowed down the gap or reduced the American military superiority. Now, for the United States, it is crucial. For example, you can see Americans have never fought another major military power that the US does not enjoy absolute military superiority. Why? The level of superiority is dropping to one of relative superiority. Americans would think very, very hard whether to go for it. We see the critique of the notion of the Thucydides trap. First of all, you blame the rising power as a cause of the war. In reality, especially in this particular case between China and the United States, it actually twists the fact who is the challenger and who is the challenged. Now, there is, of course, a psychological gap or bias perception between people who feel being challenged and the people who are labeled as challenger. Now, this is a very, very clear example to show that. And unlike the cases of rising powers challenging the ruling powers, in the cases such as the Soviet Union challenging the United States or Japan challenging the United States. Now, in this round of rise and fall of major powers or towards the direction of war, now we could see it is normally and probably logical outcome would be, the dominant power launches or initiates a war of prevention that we call the we call the preventive war to consolidate its hegemonic position. Therefore, we see Mearsheimer, Allison, and those American security experts, they deliberately or at least methodologically politicize China's rise to have a real case against China's rise, because China's rise is touching the nerves of Americans who feel that, the Chinese are closing in. And this actually helped terminate the U.S. engagement policy towards China, the engagement policy of almost 50 years. And we see a few, I think, wrong, description or certainly myth about the Thucydides trap when it is used to describe the China's relations, China's interaction with the United States. The first one is actually, it is not true that China is reaching power parity with the United States. China is still far behind the United States. Therefore, in this cycle of accommodation and confrontation, as far as China is concerned, is at a relatively early stage. But suddenly, Americans realize that if it doesn't do something, something as far as they are concerned would happen to fundamentally undermine American domination in the world. And secondly, China is actually on defensive. It is reason, but it is facing real serious problems at home and beyond the national borders. Therefore, for China, it is not true that they want to do something such as replace America to become the top power in the international affairs. Another very important fact is that China is the most visible beneficiary of the existing international system. Now, without the international system still dominated by Western powers, China could not rise as it is. Of course, the international system is unfair in many aspects to China. I'll give you one example. The STR, we call Special Drawing Rights of the International Monetary Fund. China for a long time has only 3.6%, now, which was a proportion equivalent to that of Australia and Belgium. Now, for China's economy at this scale, it's certainly a kind of unfair arrangement. So IMF had a kind of major reform. Currently, the ratio of China's special drawing rights have reached about 11 to 12%, but still quite far below the Chinese contribution to the global international development. For example, in the last 10 years, China contributed about 1/3 of global economic growth rate. Now, this alone would show that the existing international order is biased against China's role, against China's position. But will China sabotage it? Certainly not. Probably China would promote reforms in the international order that address the unfairness to China, but this is what we call a promote changes in the system, but not project change of the system. There's a big, I think that's a Poussin's word. I just quote his word, but what I'm trying to say is that China is not really trying to revolutionizing the international order, political and economic alike, because it is fundamentally against the Chinese vested interests. Another interesting thing is that in IR theory, a threat is theoretically defined as composing two things, intention and capability. China's rise is about enhance the capability, economic and military alike. But when China reaches a level of power, intention would not matter that much anymore. It is capability that matters much more. So we see this kind of confusion, of the deliberate confusion to confuse the intention with the capability, or capability with the intention. Therefore, capability is intention, and when capability becomes intention, something has to be done against it. So Wang Yi made it very, very clear that accusing China of replacing the U.S. for the position in the world is the biggest misjudgment. But misjudgment or not, probably doesn't matter anymore, because the said policy in the entire Western world is against the continued rise of China with a new set of countermeasures. Okay, the logic of Thucydides' war. Are we destined to war? The majority of American IR scholars and security experts believe so, and increasing larger numbers of the Chinese experts also, embrace this kind of idea that war could not be avoided anymore. So that was actually the central meaning of the article written by Wang Jisi, a Beida professor. Now, even he said something like that. We always branded him as a pro-America scholar. Even he said something like the war between the United States and China has become increasingly unavoidable. Now we can sense now the majority of what the Chinese think about this kind of issue. Now they have reason to believe so, because now first off, we have this kind of structural conflicts of interest between the two countries, the clash of civilizations, U.S. commitment to countries that have territorial dispute with China, and let me say, one of the four core national interests of the United States in Asia has been to prevent emergence of a peer rival in this region. So in the Cold War era, it was Soviet Union. Before the Cold War, it was Japan. Now it was China's turn. All these point to the direction the kind of confrontation cannot be avoided at all. And the American domestic politics, hijack rational policies. I just want to give you one example. All the China issues are weaponized in doing something against China. The most recent example of this kind of meteorological balloon, the Americans shoot it down. Now we know, and Americans know it was a meteorological balloon, and the Americans did not take any action at the very beginning. It was until just a few days before Biden would have to make a State of Union address in the Congress, and it was huge, backlash from the Republicans against the Biden's policy to let it go. Now, this kind of politics, played the essential role in citing American-China policy. So that is what we call, in Chinese, we call the 形势比人强, that is the external pressure outpower your personal choice. And the nature of the dominant power. Now, we all know what America is. Specifically, it's a country that maximize this kind of culture of dealing with the opponents from the position of power and strength. So Blinken, annoyed Yang Jieshi in Ankara conference between the senior American and the Chinese officials, and he started the talk by saying that we will deal with you from position of strength. Yang Jieshi replied very harshly that you are not qualified to say such a thing anymore. Well, that point out to this kind of clash of mentality and the state behavior and the brinkmanship. Now we see this kind of practices of American warships entering the 12 nautical mile, in Spratlys, we couldn't say within 12 nautical mile territorial waters, but in Aerosol Islands, that where China announced the basic line and the basic points in border demarcation. So that was a different matter. So when the freedom of navigation operations are mounted within 12 nautical miles of the territorial waters claimed by China, and China's military vessels come to intercept and overshadow the intruding warships, the distance, we call it physical distance, has been reduced to minimum, and in one occasion, only 40 yards. So we often use this kind of example to show a war of 40 yards, so that we can test, we can think how close the two nations are at war from time to time. I wouldn't say at war, but at armed conflicts or the possibility of accidental exchange of air. But if accidental exchange of air has the casualties from both sides, it will turn the whole thing very, very ugly. Then the danger of the danger of Cold War. In this slide, I have two definition or analysis of two Cold Wars. The first Cold War, that is between the United States and Soviet Union, it did not really evolve into a real war, a shooting war. It was a Cold War because it has never been meant a hot war would be, initiated, largely because we call the MAD, mutually assured destruction. And for the United States, there is no need to wage a war against the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union was going down. And it wasn't a rising power. It was, so it was not necessary. And the logic of the Cold War, the new Cold War against China. Now, when we try to think about this kind of logic, I have several things in my mind. When the war is thinkable and even fightable, it means that China has not reached the level of MAD as perceived by the United States. The U.S. has the reason to think so because from the American military analysts, China only has something 2 or 3 dozen, intercontinental ballistic missiles that could hit the American mainland. America has a very sophisticated national missile defense system. So if China only has, let's say, 30 missiles that could be used to hit the American mainland, it wasn't mad, right? So this kind of logic, is kind of threatening. And when I, in the previous slide, I use this rationality before it is too late. That really means China is fast catching up in terms of nuclear storage, nuclear arsenal, in terms of power projection, in terms of, MAD capabilities that have been accumulated in the last 1 or 2 decades. And if there is nothing that to be done, in the next next decade or so, or next 2 decades or so, China would certainly reach the level that Americans is very fearful, the level of MAD. So fight tonight has become a mentality of American senior officers and even a new norm. Only last week, Chair of Joint Chiefs of Staff, Malley, made it very clear that at the very moment, 800,000 of American soldiers are put on high alert, which is about 60% of American armed forces. Of course, we have this background of the Ukraine war, and of course, the Tsai Ing-wen's visit to the United States and the Latin American countries that, really stimulated a very tense situation. But I wouldn't say that this high level of military alert of 800,000 soldiers. It was just staged last week. It has been so for quite a long period of time already. Okay, in 2020, we live very dangerously. No, this was from a Hollywood movie in 1980s when I first went to Australia to study. I think that movie title is "Year We Live Dangerously." But this word is really Xi Jinping's word, titanic wave and crushing storms. That shows his perception of international situation. So both China's current rise and the deep fall in late Qing take place in the context of Western domination. And China faces prospects of externally imposed military actions in both cycles of the previous cycles and in the current cycle. Although Beijing is in a much stronger position today than the year 1874. When Li Hongzhang said, no, this was unseen change in 10,000 in 1,000 years. And one type of cost-effective war against China is what we call proxy war. Now let's take Taiwan as example. Now we think about war in the Taiwan Strait either in terms of reunification war or war against the dual independence. So that would be, now this would be actually an image that has passed and will not come back. But more realistic challenge is really that the Americans deliberately, touch upon the Chinese red line with the collaboration of the Taiwanese authority, with the salami, encroachment of the red lines until one day, people lose temper. The military action was provoked. When that happens, now we see the exactly repetition of the Ukraine war today. It is not a total war. It could be a short, regional, and even controllable armed conflict. But when that happens, all European countries, all American allies could not refuse American demand. Okay, let's sanction on China. So the result would be the same, but America will not be involved in a direct fight with the Chinese. So this is something I know Americans have been planning for quite a long time. Should we pessimistic? No, last year when I taught my last class in Macau University, I told the students that I'm very lucky. I live entire my life in peace. Whether you are lucky enough like me, I'm not that sure anymore. I hope I won't intimidate you by these kind of war prospects. Now, if we talk about the power transition is about armed conflict, or vicious competition between major powers, we have to be prepared for that kind of consequences or the scenarios. But I put something here to moderate my threatening remarks of tonight. First of all, at least the hegemon calculates cost of armed conflict. If you calculate the cost, that would mean that you are still sensible. You still want to come up with rational policies. Now, even if there are hot heads in the Congress, even in Pentagon, overwhelmingly the administration still takes rational policies. I hope that's still the case. And the second, Pentagon cares about body bags. That is American culture or political culture. It's a kind of anti-war type of culture. I think Milley just 2 weeks ago called, I think on the 31st of March, he called the hotheads cool down. He said something, we are not on the brink of war with China. So you should cool down, cool down, cool down. And Ellison made an interview with media people, I think about 10 days ago. He made it very, very clear. He was a person who said, okay, we are destined to war with China. But he said, now, if a war takes place between China and the United States, it is mutually suicidal. So when we have this kind of cool mind in the US, we place hope on the triumphant of this kind of rational and reasonable, calculation and thinking. Okay, on our side, so when I say our side, I should not say on our side, but anyway, Beijing too upholds this very subtle, we call core national interests, 核心利益. Now, when we talk about core interests, I'm always very, unhappy about the interpretation of this term of core national interests. Core national interests, of course, are what the Beijing government try to uphold strongly, but some people would interpret it as core national interests entails the national resolve to wage war against others. So that is not really true. At least it is only half true. Now, in this, we call the terminology of core national interest is one coin of two sides. One, on the one side, it is firmly holding China's claim on national sovereignty and territorial integrity. On the other hand, maintenance of peace. Now, for the sake of you young people, right? I remember I had a debate with a young student, and he complained that China was too soft. China should be much tougher. And I said, you want a war? And he said, why not? I asked, do you want to study overseas? Of course. And said, the first thing, if there is a war, the government would do is to freeze the foreign currency. How could you get money to study overseas? And he become speechless. But what I'm trying to say, peace is in the best interest of everyone, even if we have to be resolved in protecting our national interests. But to me, peace is somehow more important than the other side of the picture. Xi Jinping, advocated very, very strongly in this in the 19th Party Congress political report. Now, war is a very serious matter that determines the rise and the ruin, the survival of a nation state. And finally, now we count on strong opposition against war by the majority of world population. I was very impressed when I heard Li Hsien-loong, the Prime Minister of Singapore, when he made a speech in Boao Forum, that every one of us was very worried that something ugly would happen between China and the United States. Like me, every morning when I read the news, I think, oh, did anything dramatic happen last night? Now, every morning, I'm get into this kind of thing. I think I finished. Thank you.
Thank for Professor Youji's enlightening lecture. To the audience who are staying with us online, thank you very much for joining us. We will end our live streaming here and we wish you a very nice evening. To the audience on site, we would like to open the floors for questions. And our questions session, we won't be live streamed or recorded. And please, if you have any questions, please raise your hand and signal us. Yes, please.
International relations students. Hope to see you soon. And my question is, on the background of the profound change in the world order in the century, especially characterized by China-US confrontation, how can we understand the Belt and the Road Initiative and the shared community for all mankind, 一带一路和人类命运共同体. So how can we understand this Chinese strategies? Looking forward to see you insights. Thank you.
You asked me a tough question. If I don't want to tell the government position here, government line here, I do not know what should I say. First of all, the Belt and Road Initiative was a preventive measure against the prospects of China being ejected from the Western-dominated international order.